The next case we'll be dealing is another landmark judgment you must have definitely heard of. It's Shreya Singhal versus Union of India case. Now, the Supreme Court of India struck down Section 66A of ITA Act, which is Information Technology Act, in 2000, which was enacted in the year 2000 in its entirety. So, this entire section was struck down by the Supreme Court of India. The petitioners had contended that the provision was vague and unconstitutional since the ground it sought to prohibit. So there are certain grounds that this section sought to prohibit. Let's have a look at those grounds. It is annoyance, inconvenience, danger, obstruction, insult, injury, criminal intimidation, or ill will. So these were the grounds that this it sought to prohibit. It went beyond the reasonable restrictions permitted under Article 19(2) of the Constitution of India. Now, I'll give you some time to read this passage again to understand it properly if you are confused. So here what happened was Shreya Singhal, the petitioner, she challenged the specific article of the Information Technology Act for being too violative of a fundamental right under Article 19 1A, which refers to the freedom of speech and expression, and Article 21, which is right to life and personal liberty. So she brought about a petition against this specific article, rather section, sorry. Now, the court concurred that holding the penalizing of transmission of information through electronic devices. We'll come back to this specific, the second passage later on. Before that, you need to understand what happened during this case. So the facts were such that two women, there's a Shreya Singhal and one other woman, they were arrested by the police for posting comments on Facebook, on social media that were considered offensive. They were allegedly offensive and objectionable because they questioned the fact that the decision to shut Mumbai after a political figure's demise was not right. So the arrests were made under Section 66A of the Technology Act, Indian Information Technology Act, and this specific section penalized anyone transmitting information through electronic medium or communication that was deemed grossly offensive, false information, intended to cause annoyance, inconvenience, danger, injury, hurt, or ill will or hatred. So these all things were considered that the specific comments about the Mumbai being shut was considered as not right by the police, and hence the arrest were made. Now, what happened was, now these things are very subjective, right? One person can say it's the right to freedom of speech and expression, but the police did not think so. The police thought that this was grossly offensive, and that's why they arrested these women. Although the women were later released and the charges were also dropped against them, this specific incident created a lot of chaos and public concern. And the public criticized such action of the police. Subsequently, the women filed a petition challenging the constitutional validity of the entire section of the Information Technology Act. Now, they challenged because they felt that it was violative of their fundamental rights. And earlier, as we all know, if a specific section is violating of any fundamental right of a person, then that fundamental right will take precedence over that specific section. So that is very important to always understand and remember in your for your examination point of view. Earlier in Shreya Singhal versus Union of India case, the Supreme Court had issued an interim order requiring that no arrests under the specific section should be made without a senior police officer approves before the approval of such senior police officers are given. And in the present case, which regards to the violation of the fundamental rights against this specific section, it went on to examine the constitutionality of the provision itself. So the whole constitutionality was taken into question and it was dealt with in the present case. The main issue was that whether this section violated the freedom of expression or not, whether the fundamental rights were clashing with this specific section or not. Because if it were, then this section was going to be held unconstitutional, right? Now, there are certain reasonable restrictions on every fundamental rights as well. It's not it's not completely free and it's not completely all consuming. Rather, it's a little restricted because in any law, full freedom is not given. There are certain parameters that have to be considered as well, which is reasonable restrictions in the interest of sovereignty, in the integrity of India, the security of the state, friendly relations with the foreign states, public order, decency, morality, or in relation to the contempt of court, defamation, or incitement to the offense. So these things, if it doesn't, if a certain action includes any of these things that have been violated, then your freedom of speech or expression or any other freedom might be curtailed. But in this case, it was not so. The court held that the law fails to establish a clear proximate relation to the protection of public order. It feels that the definition of the reasonable restriction was misinterpreted by the police, and thus the arrest was not being made in the correct manner, for the correct reason, because the reasonable restrictions and the fundamental rights were clashing with each other. Here, the Supreme Court observed that Section 66A was excessively broad and vague. It led to the chilling effect on free speech. Because of this, the terms offensive and menacing were not defined clearly. Even in the police statements and other areas where the reasons where arrest was made, no clear reason was given, and the reason could not be tied to the section or the restrictions by the article itself, by the constitution itself. So there was no clear reason why it should be allowed. Now, the court noted that the provision was not in consonance with Constitution's guarantee of freedom of speech and expression, as it did not meet the reasonable restriction test. The court emphasized that while the state has a legitimate interest in regulating communication, the regulation must not be too broad or infringe upon fundamental freedoms. We have to strike a balance. The court said that there should be a balance between freedom and restrictions as well, and it should not be restricted too much. So the court noted that the vagueness of this particular section could lead to a lot of arbitrary and inconsistent applications and a lot of inconsistent actions as well in the future, which is contrary to the principle of legality and fair notice. So that is why the Supreme Court came to a conclusion that the specific section was unconstitutional and should be removed from the particular act. The Supreme Court declared this was unconstitutional. It struck down, and it did not satisfy the test of reasonable restrictions under Article 19, Clause 2. Now, this judgment was very important because it made a significant change in an act, and it protected the citizens' right of freedom of speech and expression completely. Also establishing that these reasonable restriction areas should be very clear, it should be very precise, and it should not be vague and arbitrary. Because if any law is vague and arbitrary, it leads to a lot of unnecessary actions, which will lead to a lot of cases and a lot of burden on the judiciary as well. I'll give you some time to go through this slide. You should give it a read. I have explained the matter to you. Let me know if you have any doubts in the comment box. You can also go ahead with reading this slide as well. Take 5 minutes time. If you don't understand, please go back to the start of the case and pause the video and read it properly. You can also, the best way to understand anything is to make notes while reading. So I urge you to start writing notes for all of these cases.